Okay, module number 7. Today we're talking about how to reveal. How to reveal your best leadership. And over the last 7 modules, we've been talking about key characteristics for extraordinary leaders. And for you dentists, what I want you to take away with for this module specifically is the key characteristic here is vulnerability. And for a lot of doctors that I work with, vulnerability is one of the hardest things to master. Vulnerability is one of the hardest things to also cultivate with your team, because typically vulnerability has been known from our battles, from our wars, from even the countries that have these divides, and how we have our shields and how our egos really drive us. But vulnerability has often been a sign of weakness, as regarded as one of the signs of weakness. But with this new era of leadership, vulnerability is really keys to honesty and integrity and compassion and respect. And with various dental teams that we've surveyed, and even in my own practice life, once I was leading with the lens of vulnerability, it makes you a human person. And at the end of the day, we are trying to create a more human and more connected society. And in the profession that you work in, vulnerability, as you've thought about in your own lives, but what I'm going to get you to think about is how vulnerability has played a really pivotal role in some of the biggest cases that you've had in your own life, and biggest cases that you've had, in your practice life. And so the other key takeaways for this week is understanding how vulnerability can connect you with your patients, and identifying 3 ways that vulnerability can show up in your practice every single day. That's number 1. And number 2, how we can celebrate our big wins of the practice. Big wins meaning gratitude every single day. Because in order to really shape our mindset and shift our mindset, especially when things can be going wrong, especially when you have unmanaged patient expectations or cases that didn't go your way, or somebody left in the middle of the day, and you have all of these different nuances, but within that there's always a silver lining. And if we can learn and teach this to our teams so that we can incorporate this every single day, guaranteed you will have less headaches, you will have less stress, you will have more time with your family and doing the things that you love to be doing. And so the one final thought here is, let's list some of those big failures that you've had. Let's go into that Pandora's box and bring it out, because that is keys to practicing vulnerability. Those are keys as teaching tools that we can use as dentists to understand where we were coming from when we made those decisions, what we learned from that, and how we can make better decisions as a result. Okay, you follow? All right, so first with vulnerability. Now, can you think of a time in the past and in your practice life where once you showed your vulnerability with a patient, with a team member, what that looked like and what happened as a result? And I'll share with you a very pivotal point in my practice life, and that changed everything, was when I confessed to my team that I had been going through a very painful divorce, and I had been living out of my car, and I was so ashamed because of what society and what people would think. Now, I remember it was in the middle of the day. We had so many different patients. We had 5 rooms, and we had patients in the waiting room. We had patients in each chair, and I felt that there was this urge in my heart to call everyone in the break room and sit everybody down, because there was a lot of gossip that was going on in the office. There was, there was a lot of pain during that time of my life, and so you can just imagine all of that. And so there was, my mind, I was not even there, but I knew that I needed to be truthful to my team, why I wasn't fully present. And so I took a deep breath, and for the first time ever, I shared with full disclosure all of the details. Now, for those of you who have been through a very devastating pain point and have been able and been fortunate to share that with your team, or maybe one member of your team, or maybe it was your office manager, and for me, it was really breaking down and letting the tears flow and really crying and allowing my emotions, because I was so tough, and I always felt that I needed to be really tough as a leader. And that vulnerability not only just made our team much closer, but it also depicted me in a light that so many of my team members were so afraid of seeing, and they didn't see that side of me before, because when I used to lead based on fear. And so this actually opened up the floodgates. This opened up the doors to a lot of what some of the other team members were facing at the same time. And it was a very beautiful experience. And from that life experience and from that lens, and I'll never forget this, because I still have probably saved some of those emails today, because it was the key indicator of how it can really change the trajectory of how you lead. And vulnerability is huge. And from there, we began to talk about some of the key topics that one doesn't necessarily talk about as a leader, and some of the challenges and struggles, and really being able to have that empathy from the leader's point of view, but then also from your team's point of view. And this is so important, because if you want to create connected and efficient teams, vulnerability is one of those key characteristics. Now, secondly, let's talk about some of those failures. What are some of the failures that you have had in your own practice life that now you can probably laugh about, but probably before, it was the most devastating thing that could ever possibly happen? And for me, I remember one time I broke a file in a patient's mouth. It was a routine root canal. It was number 15. Patient was going skiing the next day and was going to be on a flight. And I found the first endodontist I could get my hands on, and this was early on in practice, so I was obviously deathly afraid. This was my first, big mistake that I made, and I was working in a group with a bunch of other doctors, and I called the endodontist and I said, what do I tell this patient? That I broke this file, and now I don't even know if this person can fly, because it might be in the sinus. In fact, I think it was actually in the sinus. But we learn from some of these big mistakes. Well, one, I probably shouldn't have been aggressive with the tools or whatever, or you have I don't even remember the actual details at the time, but we all have one of these main pivotal points of failures, but now these could be teaching tools. Or perhaps maybe it was a time where you hired one of your team members who embezzled from you and who was stealing from you, and how maybe it was what that did for you was have better and strict protocols of hiring, that you weren't just going to hire based on the first conversation, or that you've set up systems as a result. So what happened as a result of those failures? And how has the failure or the mistake or that challenge, how has that really contributed to you as a leader and to how you now teach these with your team? Or what learning lessons can you learn from some of those top failures, and how you can embrace some of those failures or mistakes or case challenges in your own personal life, but then your practice life, which ultimately will lead to a more significant bottom line. Because after we talk about some of these things, then you start to implement, well, what can you do to avoid some of these things? And then finally, be consistent in how you're training your team members so that you can catch some of these things, catch some of these red flags in these patients, catch some of these mistakes or challenges when you're doing certain procedures. So take a deep breath. You have done an extraordinary amount. You are diving in deep within yourself and within some of the nuances that we don't even get to think about in our practices. But also don't forget that a lot of this is just mastering in your own life and mastering in the thought process of how you are aware of your emotions in your own life. Lastly, let's not forget to celebrate your big wins every single day.